to end our segments on electronic acoustics, and seriously, we're going to end them. We're not doing any more. Got to talk about the caveat. And it's the kind of the elephant in the room that we haven't talked about yet. The one problem with electronic acoustics is it's electronic. And for any of you who own phones, and I'm not saying it's Apple's fault, but here's one of them. And every once in a while you kind of turn around and you go, oh, I got to get a new phone because now software's improved, things have changed, or worse yet, my battery's dying, my phone doesn't work anymore, and you get rid of it. So you build this auditorium and you get electronic acoustics in it, and everything's working really well when the system goes in. There's a whole tuning process that occurs where filters are set in a bunch of electronics to create the tuning of the room. Now, what happens down the road? Let's talk about that. Down the road, 5 years, 10 years. Chances of equipment failing, older it gets, they're all basically computers. The first failure mode in most of these things is power supplies. And any of you who have had power supplies fail in your computers, you understand how that works. So one of the first things that you would want to do if you're an owner of a venue that's getting electronic acoustics is buy backup power supplies for all of the primary equipment. Things like amplifiers you can replace, things like loudspeakers you can replace. There's going to be comparable devices down the road that you could use that don't totally change the tuning of the system. However, the electronics that create the electronic environment that are simulating this room are sophisticated computers with sophisticated algorithms that are tuned by a group of people who come in and do the tuning. Now, in the case of a lot of the systems we've done, the people coming to do the tuning are from other countries. So it's $18,000, $20,000 for the tuning sessions to get the system set up. Some systems are tuned by groups of people from the United States. To be honest, their costs aren't any better, but at least they're a little more accessible. So looking forward, power supply failures, you need to have backups because at some point, just like this phone, they're not going to have parts for these things. This console I just bought recently, and the ones I just got rid of, I just threw out a bunch of equipment recently that was all, I don't know, $10,000, $12,000 worth of recording equipment that was obsoleted by default, and I could no longer get parts for it, so I was figuring, why record in this platform? I'm recording all in computer anyway. But as you go forward, as your electronics packages potentially fail, what's the really bad thing that could happen? Let's just say the processors that actually generate the acoustic environment fail. Not power supplies, but actual processing boards. The first question is, are they available from the factory? Now, most people are keeping parts for maybe 5 years for some of the things they build. So same situation. Long-term survivability, you'd really want to buy at least an extra frame or so that you could put in the software. And that's the key to this. It's not just a processor, it's a processor and a software package. So if your software is one of the early versions, because right now the systems we're using, we're into version 4. The really early ones, those software packages will not install on the most recent version of the hardware. So if you've got a system that's one of the early ones, which could be 8 years old, you've got a potential failure that would require not only replacing hardware, but bringing a tuning crew back in. Because with the huge improvements in algorithms and processing power, the newer frames do not take the software from the older systems. So looking at that, you might want to think about buying spares. You might want to think about where is the transition point where version 1, version 2, version 3, it stops allowing you to reinstall the software. Very similar to any computers. You know, if you're like me, I own a computer that does Windows 95 because I got some software occasionally I need to run that runs on Windows 95. I've got some stuff on XP. I've got Mac OS going all the way back to the days of the Mac II CI, believe it or not. So if I ever want to bring any of those files forward, assuming the thing turns on, I could actually transfer the files. So if you're in an electronic acoustics room, you got to be thinking about your future repairability. And honestly, whatever the cost of the system is, you should be putting away 5% of that cost per year in a fund for upgrade or replacement at some point down the road. Now that sounds a little high, but to be honest, it's not. Not when you look at all the peripheral costs that go along with it. If you lose your electronic acoustics, it's not like your room stopped working. If your room was designed by someone who knew acoustics and you have a reasonably good place to start with, you're still probably going to have a viable environment, but you're going to lose all of the bells and whistles and all of the enhancements that you get with the system. So word to the wise, keep in touch with the manufacturer of your system, keep in touch with the software versions, know where the end of life is going to be on certain key pieces of equipment, and either get spares, get spare parts, or plan on having to wholesale replace with the most current version, which will require retuning, which can be well worth it, because to be honest, the acoustic algorithms have gotten so much better, just like everything else in the world, that the nuances are worth it in terms of what you can do with it. But the reason it requires retuning is that those nuances didn't exist in the early versions. So the ability to do certain lateral moves and things inside the software, moving sound around, coming in from the sides, doing different things, is way better in the new versions. So anyway, that's kind of the caveat that you do have to think about if you decide to go electronic, is failure.